everybody. I hope you enjoyed the morning sessions and the coffee break, and you are ready to join us in this panel discussion and keynote presentation about biocontrol and the future of farming. You know, we're always talking about the future of our farming. There are new innovations coming, there are new challenges, climate challenges, new pests, new diseases that are arising, but also the farming models are changing. Most of the challenges we are facing are because we are actually beyond some of the most important planetary boundaries. We have gone beyond climate change, we have gone beyond biosphere integrity. And so the key question here is how agriculture and what needs to happen for us to ensure that we are growing food within the planetary boundaries. Population is keeping on growing, and the challenges we are seeing today are still going to be there. And our objective today with the panelists here is to highlight the challenges that farmers face, the biocontrol tools that they use, and also to hear their opinion about how policy needs to change to help sustainable farming, to help the future of farming, and also to implement more biocontrol solutions. I'm very happy to introduce you the panelists. We have Bernard Lehmann, agricultural and food economist. He's also chairperson of FEEBLE, the foundation board of the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture. Welcome, Bernard. We have Dr. Saliuni Assi, coordinator of the African Union Inter-African Phytosanitary Council. Welcome. Then we have Max Schulman, farmer and chairman of Cereals and Oilseed Working Group within Copa Cogeca. Welcome, Max. We have Solo. For those of you who were present this morning in the previous session, you have already heard him speaking about the success story in Brazil, and is senior manager of business development and innovation at BP Bioenergy. And we have then Pierre Girard, science journalist and video maker, who is heavily involved in helping the sustainable transition of agriculture. So before we move into the panel, I am honored to invite on the stage our keynote speaker, who is going to talk to us about the role of biocontrol in shaping the future of agriculture.
Thank you, Alessandra. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Lucius and Jennifer, for the invitation to come here to Basel for this keynote address at your conference. The preparation of such a keynote address is for me an occasion to combine findings more around the topic of biocontrol and less in the technology of biocontrol, because I am not a specialist of this. You are the specialist of this. My background is food security, especially sustainable and resilient food security for all. In this regard, a great deal remains to be done in the field of food system transformation. My agenda starts with the transformation of food system, what are the parts of the system and what should be transformed, and its understanding in a dynamic view, in a historic perspective. And I will also stress some of the mentioned today's challenges, enduring issues and new aspects in the challenges. And it is clear that the solution pathways are very diverse, and I will also mention some aspects of this diversity and close with the possibility how to support the transition from the classical methods to the more ecologic-friendly methods of plant protection. If you ask students, I am still from time to time in universities, in classes, and if I ask the question, what is for you the main aspect of food system transformation, this is the result you can see. You have to fight against hunger, against obesity on the one hand. Biocontrol, from time to time, it's not well known generally in university, and you have food waste, agroecology, sustainability, all these approaches come to the forefront. They depend from the concern and also from the interest. Of course, none of these aspects is the single solution for the transformation of the food system towards a better future. Transformation started very early. I will show you some dimension of this food system transformation thousands of years ago. Transformation was necessitated by many factors. It is a continuum: population growth, shortages, productivity, and also new findings in technology and biology, chemistry, and the sustainability dimension and the resilience dimension asked also for a transformation. The status quo was never a solution. We often hear this: status quo is not anymore a solution, but the status quo has never been a solution in the past. Maybe today it is more urgent than even before. I will use the terminology of resilience and sustainability just to show what is my understanding of this. With resilience, that's more the short-run ability of a system to thrive in the face of change, of shocks. And the sustainability is the long-run perspective of a system to continue to have these functions without a decline in quality during generations and also for the future generations. I will start my journey more than 160,000 years ago. And it is interesting to observe at that stage what has been done when they were confronted to resource depletion. Hunting and fruit picking was the main activities for securing food. The learning mode was always ensured as a survival dimension about depletion of natural resources and the need to migrate. Nature could therefore regenerate. The first reflex was in that moment to leave the place used before. And you told about the planetary dimension. We cannot anymore get on a new planet. We use our planet and we have to use on the planet. At this moment, this was different. And this is a bit in our genetics. We leave the place, we want to leave the place. We were there in a different situation than today. In a picture that could look like this, some impacts in the ecosystem, but a high degree of regeneration because the impact was low and also the impact was not very dense. Later, the step is big. 8,000 years ago, maybe 50 to 50,000 years ago, we had the first step in plant breeding, cultivation, migratory cultivation, and also the migration and the expansion of the exploited area was necessary for mainly to reason population growth and depletion of the resources. The strategy was productivity increase and migration, and the landscape began to change because agriculture began to be visible. This can be shown schematically like this. Agricultural systems were created within the natural system, a more visible impact, but the regeneration was not a problem. Later, the more the progress was made in breeding, the more valuable the achievements were. They had to be protected. A private property was to some extent created, and they needed carefully cultivated soil. Productivity gains on the one hand and limitations due to the plant disease on the other were the first step of biocontrol at this moment. Biocontrol experience through crop rotation and also the comparisons between the different systems. The learning mode was very active at this moment. The strategy was managed productivity and expansion of the utilized area. From this point of time, it was necessary to manage the site in which agriculture took place. We had to do with the sustainability and the resilience of the own system created, and to look for resilience and sustainability for the surroundings, the ecological system. This is a new aspect. We have two different systems in a cohabitation. Later, in the first millennium of the new age, the strategy for food security was focused on the following actions: agronomic intensification, you have a picture from the Romans, and below from the Middle Age, mechanization, breeding, soil preparation, nutrition cycles, and also the triennial crop rotation for the resource generation. It is also one dimension of biocontrol to some extent, and sustainability in a long-run perspective. And they had also to avoid plant diseases, and they learned what plant diseases, what are the causes of the plant diseases. Expansion was still necessary because the population was growing. Later on, late Middle Age until the 19th century, we had revolutions more than before, with Albert Terre stating that humus is a very important fertilizer, and we begin to put external humus in the agriculture site in order to increase the fertility of the soil. And a few years later, Justus von Liebig, with the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium mineral theory, this helps to understand what are the key elements for plants to grow, so that at this stage, the believing was the plant productivity is unlimited. You can boost this growth of the plants. At the same time, Malthus was observing that it was very difficult to feed the world, and the productivity growth was lower than the population growth. And this dialogue and also this discussion boosted the methods to boost the productivity. And in the last 150 years, we had also a kind of revolution. The increase of the population was enormous. In a very short time, given the time I mentioned before, 160,000 years ago, it was the population increase was important, but not so important in the last 150 years. Population multiplied by 5.5, and the Green Revolution, and with the crop production multiplied by 8. That was really necessary to do that. The progress of medicine were here, and the agronomy had to bring an answer to that. Increasing population, the lifetime was longer, so that plant breeding, minerals, and synthetic fertilizer, plant protection were really necessary. It was also characterized by simplicity, effectiveness, and also economic advantage. In parallel, we had, and we are still having, because these approaches are very important and remain very important. The organic movement, 100 years ago, biocontrol, I read more than 100 years, integrated pest management, integrated production, and there was no real domination by these alternatives. The mainstream has still its roots in the Green Revolution I mentioned before. This is one of the reasons that we have still really severe problems on our planet. One is That was a bit my activity in the last 4 years in the UN and the FAO, that we have still more than 700 million people suffering from hunger and malnutrition. And the question is the status, we have to feed the world, an answer to that problem the answer is no, because the hunger and malnutrition has to do with missing local production and not global production, missing access to food, deficit in access to food, conflicts, climate change, and so on. And the second one, you mentioned it, Alessandra, is the ecological footprint in many domains. The footprint is also very serious in the area of crop protection linked to biodiversity and to climate. We are all aware of that, but we are not very effective in changing these problems. It takes too much time to do that. So that, right to the point, I would say the food system as such are not resilient enough against shocks. We had the shock of COVID, we had the shock of Ukraine war, and this shock was visible in its consequences in several nations, also in Middle East and in Africa. Second point, the food system as such don't have a sustainable design from themselves. That we need a lot of artificial corrections, and it is not sustainable. And the third point, the food system endangers the sustainability of the natural environment and its resilience. We have in Switzerland a lot of public polls concerning this relationship, and it is clear that the area occupied by agriculture has a huge influence on the ecological system around agriculture. I have, without any transition, a slide showing you that we have to take in account that we produce on our cropland on the world much more than we need. You can see this optically from the left to the right, the foods eaten or the required intake on the right and the edible crops on the other side. We have here differences due to to food losses, of course, but also food waste. Biofuels in blue, it's a big part, and also concentrated feed produced on crops for animals and also for meat and for milk. We use also more resources than necessary to produce our food. That the United Nations, its highest organ of food security is the Committee for World Food Security, presented a lot of different reports and decided on this subject in the last years, and also this week in Rome. It's about strengthening urban and peri-urban food systems, but we have also reducing inequalities, socioeconomic questions, which has to do with the food security of the most vulnerable. And we have agroecology. It is a very important report showing that agroecology is a really important contribution to the food system, agroecology in its 13 dimensions, and biocontrol in a broad sense of the definition is an important part of this agroecology. So if I come back to this slide shown before, it shows that we had a lot of different aspects to deal with, but one single aspect is not the solution. Let's look at food waste. Food waste in red and food losses in green. We have a difference between the global south and the global north, so that the global north has to fight against food waste and the global south has to face against food losses, and we don't need the same approaches for the consumer are involved in the red zone, and the farmers, and also the industry is involved in the green zone. So we need concrete steps in that direction in order to use less resources to produce the food we need. I showed you the calories before. Here you have the graph for proteins. The difference between the left and the right is much more higher, so that it is to some extent a scandal to produce as much proteins with nitrogen, with all the fertilizer, with the plant protection means, and to use so few protein for our needs, for the needs of humanity. So we can say, where do you stand now in that relation, in this constellation? Do we produce enough today for the needs of tomorrow? Tomorrow we will have 9.5, 10 billion people on the planet. This despite the hunger and the malnutrition. Normally from the UN agency now we say, yes, we have enough, but this is a problem of the repetition of the production all over the world. The second point, what's about the sustainability of today's food production? A lot has to be done, still to be done, that's the answer. And where should the main focus be directed? Which transformation do we need? Do we need more, or do we need the same produced differently? We have two tendencies. We have a part of the political world saying that we need changes, but these changes has to be incremental. Normally, for agriculture, stricter environmental requirements, for example, the cautious way on the left, and the more courageous way on the right, much more demanding, with disadvantages, investment also in the future. While the second part, which corresponds to the needs identified by the science, the first part, or the incremental science changes, are more the result of the forces of the interests in the debates of the parliaments and also in the government. So that the science requires bold changes, and the real world is making small steps in incremental changes. Is that the right way? Is that enough? That is a bit also the question. We can ask, what is holding up the transformation? What is holding up the speed of this transformation? Resistance to change is perfectly normal, and it is not just a matter of bad will. I think that is important to say. It is legitimate interest because of those who have invested a lot in the resources in the previous past. It is also about jobs. It is also about convictions that would have to be abandoned. It is therefore of great importance to show perspective for these people, for all these group perspectives and also business opportunities. This could motivate and reduce the risk aversion. Among the convictions, economically spoken, I am an economist, we can observe that the convictions for the chemical synthetic method in agriculture are characterized by simplicity, rather easy access to the know-how. And I see that also in some villages in Africa, it is easy for the farmers to get access to this technology, really easy. It is offered on a plate. It is economically advantageous. The total effort is advantageous. It is highly effective in comparison with other approaches, but more and more difficulties arise due to the resistance, and no longer approved substance lack in plant protections appear. I have a Swiss example on the next slide. But here we have to say we have non-internalized negative external effects. The Swiss example is only to show you that last week the government proposed to ban 6 new substances, active substances, The Farmers Union criticized this ban will create a gap in the plant protection. And what I have to say here as a private person, it is never mentioned that there is an alternate solution. It is never mentioned. We are completely locked in the track we had in the past, and there is no imagination, no creativity for this. In the media we can read, in the statements they make, that's political statements, that is clear. But economically spoken means that the external effect will be given more weight than before. That is a prudent step of the government to consider more the negative external effects and to ban this thing. The convictions about biocontrol methods in agriculture, they are rather complex. I had several phone calls in the last weeks to prepare myself for this speech. I said, oh, that's a bit complex. It's not so effective, economically risky, uncertain on the effect that can have. But that's positive because we have a better protection of the environment, but the positive effects are not internalized. And it's a huge contribution to sustainability and also to resilience. So that I tried to sum up and to put the farmer in the center. He is pushed out of the old system with the bans, for example. And this is not, he is put out of the comfort zone, and this is difficult, because there is a loss of problem-solving ability on the classical side. And he's invited to go, but the pull is not so strong as the push, maybe, and the farmers are in a difficult situation. But if I put other questions in these discussions I had in the past, I mentioned very often there is a holding back vector, and holding back vector, and this holding back vector has to do with the traditional route somehow still remains the safe haven, despite of the adversities. It is the private sector for obvious reasons, but also many other circles, like related to agriculture, have an inertia to move in the right direction. And it is the important, we can say statistically, it's the importance of the safety equivalent. It's safer, it is more difficult, but safer than the solution on the other side. Around the farmers, and this is what I could observe everywhere on the world, farmers are not alone with their decision, with the extension services. Very often, in some region of the world, the extension services are private linked to the selling of substances, vocational education, agriculture research. We have input seller, that is normal. A part of the resources are invested today in the lowering path of using chemicals, and few is invested in the path of alternative solutions. I could also observe that your sponsors, we have firms from the classical way with a new department in biological science. That is important also to understand that they need cash cows to finance the innovation. But sometimes cash cows are remaining very long in the business. So we need also perspective, business opportunities, and this has also to do with the framework, the legal framework. And I want just to say, concerning the legal framework, I observed a study, a report from the Institute for European Environmental Policy. They criticize a bit the fact that the legal framework is not strong enough in the European community. Maybe you disagree with this point. Lucius told me that you could disagree with that. But the fact is that this legal framework, according to this report, is not effectively enough to boost the incentives and the support for biocontrol methods, and also to have a better fulfillment of the SDGs. So that I come to my conclusion. We have a legal framework considering two sides: the classical way methods with the advantage they have a private character, the disadvantage are public. And on the biocontrol method, the advantage is a public character, positive externalities, and disadvantages in comparison has a private character. And you have to correct this. You have bans. You could see the Swiss example from I mentioned before, or you can boost the reserve. And what we can observe is incentives, but what we have very few on the world are incentives, taxes on toxic substances. We have this in Denmark, for example, I think also in Sweden, but it is not very current in Europe as such. And this would multiply the effect. It would have incentive on the one side, and we can use the money of the disincentives to finance the incentives, and you could have a more power for that. My conclusion is we should stop to say we have to feed the world and to give a legitimation to the classical methods. We produce more food, and I showed you that with slides, than for 10 million people. The proposed corrective measures do not jeopardize the food security for all. We have to look side by side what are the problems in the most vulnerable regions. On the contrary, the proposed measures would strengthen the food security, they relieve the environment and thus support sustainable food production and supply. And they bring also more justice north-south. I think that biocontrol methods in a broad sense have to be better explained. It would be a success if the statement of the Swiss Farmers Union would have said last week, we have alternate solutions, but we need a bit more support for these alternate solutions. That would be also a hope for the farmers, and this should be part of the communication in the future. And we should have less research only in what do we have to do with the bans and how can we do that. We should have more research in the combinations of the two methodologies and also in biocontrol as such. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for your presentation. It was a nice trip that you started for us in the history of agriculture, starting from when we were hunter-gatherers and then grain domesticated us, perhaps. It was not us who domesticated grain. And before we start and go into the depth of our panel, I want to apologize with Herman because I forgot to introduce you. You were hidden behind all the other panelists. And another panelist today who is going to address our question is Herman van Hellert. He's president of IBMA Global and also director of strategic alliances at BioBest. So now you know all the speakers we have here with us. Bernard, during your presentation earlier, you mentioned that it's almost 300 years that we are posing the question how we are going to feed a growing world. The first time it was posed, it was in 1766, and we are still posing the same question today. And we have more challenges because, as you explained, we are exceeding the planetary boundaries and the environment is changing. Max Saliu, I would like to ask you, what are the challenges that farmers are facing today when they have to grow food but staying within planetary boundaries?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to congratulate the speaker for an excellent keynote, a very enlightening as well. And thank also the participants and the organizers of this event. Your question is very important. I've been working in Africa for nearly 10 years and having a chance to go to many rural places and meet farmers in the rural trying to grow food. They have several kind of challenge. First of all, they have to face a lot of pest and disease, and in an environment that is changing, climate change, that actually accelerate those issues like pest and disease. But in addition to that, they're also facing issues of poor soil fertility, and at the same time, not having access to effective technologies, either because they are expensive or they are not at all accessible. So in these conditions, you find that farmers sometimes resort in using, techniques that are not really working, or having to share 50-50 deal with the pest. Some of them, if they have a chance to, to live near where there is agricultural extension officers, they could have access to good agricultural practices. In as much as chemical, synthetic chemical producing companies are there, them also could become quite expensive to a point that producing food becomes more expensive when they use chemicals, given that pests also have developed resistance. So it's a complex of challenges that have been highlighted by the colleague. But the good thing in Africa is that the environment is still not super polluted. Therefore, there is an option still that government can pick to choose to, to work with biological control, biocontrol solutions, making sure that ecosystem services work, and also the diversity is also preserved without harming people's health and without compromising the health of the environment as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for an extremely interesting keynote. I think that what we could learn from that is that the food system as a whole is very complex, it's very long, but it's also extremely wide. When you look at it from the farmer's perspective, for sure, we put ourselves always into the beginning of it, and that's true. It starts from there. But even before you start working to go forward, you already have made it quite wide. We have the providers of plant protection products, the seeds, fertilizers, all of the inputs are there. Usually they are also regulated through, regulations that are in place, either if it is on national level or regional, or even going to EU level, like we know. So farmers are all the time looking, at least from the European perspective. We are trying to make sure that we as economical operators will also be able to thrive, go forward, and also be able to invest in our business. We are not the difference at all from any other business. We are not only producers. We are actually business operators. That's the first thing that a lot of people make the misjudgment. They talk about producers. Yes, we do produce, but that's for sure one thing that we are supposed to do, but we also need to have the economics involved there. That's a thing that we are looking at. Why do we start to look outside the chain when everybody knows that the change is always something that you fear? We are now under the change. We are facing it because of the change in the climate pattern all over the world, not only in Europe, but I'm maybe looking more into the European side. We see that this has actually become a quite rapid change, and we see that we have to do something on farm level. At the same time, we tend to look back and see how is the rest of the chain helping here. Legislation is on its way. Usually that comes too late, and it also is too constricting. So that's one thing that should really be looked at from this point of view, how to make sure that the legislation that is put in place, first of all, would enhance. Then it comes to knowledge and know-how to the farming level. We are a fairly, conservative bunch. We are fairly old still in Europe. We see that the farm age is going up. I think the middle age today is somewhere around 57, 58 years on the farmers in Europe, and it goes up on a yearly basis. So we also need to make sure that the education given to that bunch and the information fits in to their way of receiving it and enhancing it. You cannot put them just like that back to the school bench. You have to invite them in together with the chain to work on the change, like a congress like this. Should have quite a bit more farmers here. Hands up the one who is a farmer in the room. How many do we have there? Looks like we are still not an endangered species, but almost. So you see, we have to involve them. I think that's another thing that we have to look at, how we go into these new types of actually using biocontrol, etc. is seeing is believing. That's a typical thing from the farmer's side. Like you already heard, you have to be able to see. If it is an extension service that can show it to you, the agronomist and all these, we need to be able to catch the early adapters, the trendsetters, and from then on move forward. So we need to show what it can be used for. Usually the push in to do that comes from the fear of losing, like we saw in the Swiss example, losing plant protection products. That's the first thing. We are not thinking as farmers losing the product, no, we are saying we are losing the business. I will not be able to grow anymore the quantity, or even worse, the quality of the produce on my fields. It's a fear of my own economics, of my family, etc. How will I be able to feed my family, even if I'm growing the food? That's the one that gets us to start the journey. And then from that on, you need to feed the journey to be able to come then behind the bend. As I would say today, we are just there in Europe, just at the bend, just to start to get more and more biocontrol into the mind of the farmers, start to use them, start to try to use them, etc. Now we need to have them on the market. So you see, there is a lot of things that are building into how we do this change. Farmers usually think very, very realistically from their own perspective, and they are ready to try things that do work. And for sure, there is always a big question mark. Are they as effective, etc.? And here it also comes in how to make sure that you can educate and explain and say, maybe you might not have one-to-one substitution when it comes to a biocontrol and a chemical plant protection product. But with the portfolio in your hands, you will be able to perform as well.
Thank you, Max and Saliu, for your question. And I think, Max, you raised an important point of like, we need to see it works in order to implement it on a large scale. And Solo, this morning you gave us an example of a success story of an implementation from a farmer's perspective. So what were the motivations, the triggers of your change to move from conventional pest control and conventional fertilization to biocontrol and bioinputs? And also, how did it affect the profitability and the productivity of your farm and industry?
Thank you for the question, Alessandra. I'd like to start by thanking you for the presentation, Bernd. Very insightful. So, Alessandra, in our case, like I mentioned this morning, I'm not shy to say that it all started with an economic motivation. We were having the global supply chain crisis due to the pandemics, COVID-19 pandemics, and the war here in Europe. And then we had to do something. I just have to remind that most of the agricultural crop we harvest in the world, they are sold as commodities. So commodities do not tolerate high costs. If you use more money to produce, you will get less money in the end because the price is globally defined. They're mostly commodities. So it all started there. And then we believed on the technology. Biocontrol was something that we already used in a low scale, and then we had the need to start using more. And then we did it, and then we started noticing the changes to the crop. So we had increased leaf health, greener plants, more resilience to weather stress situations that we have in Brazil, and we started noticing through all the years that we were getting the same or higher yields in the fields where we were using biocontrol and inoculants. So it has the same efficiency at a cost competitive situation, and bringing the same or more yield. So it's the perfect bundle. So that was our case. So going back to your question, talking more widely, I'd say that what's important in every biocontrol adoption, first of all, again, it has to be cost competitive. Otherwise, the farmer won't buy it. Correct, Max? Of course, it needs to be properly registered, so we need to have all the background from the government, the regulation, and the registering process smooth running. The products must have quality and be efficient, so it has to fix the problem we have. So it has to go to the targets, to the pest. It has to control the disease. It has to provide the nutrient that you are replacing from mineral. So it has to do its job in a good way. And for us at BPE, what is very important as well is that the biocontrol is helping decreasing the carbon intensity of the sugar and ethanol we sell. And it's really part of our core strategy in the energy transition. So when you replace an input that you use high amounts of energy to produce it, or they are not renewable, then you get a higher carbon intensity score, and that's not interesting for the energy transition. We need more low CI products, low carbon intensity products. So that's helping us a lot. So that's what I believe is important, and by fixing this, by addressing all these points here, I think the adoption will keep increasing year by year, and it will be like a regular practice for farmers worldwide.
Thank you, Saulo. And I think it's very interesting what you're saying also about reducing the carbon footprint, because last year, I don't know if you know, but McKinsey issued a report about the decarbonization of agriculture, because agriculture contributes to 1/4 of overall emissions. And the second most effective measure was the switch to biocontrol and bio-inputs, biofertilizers. And we have here a real case to show that what was identified in the study actually worked. And also you mentioned that for you, the change was triggered by external shocks, that, as Bernard said earlier, may be shocks that are negative for agriculture, like COVID, like the war, but in your case, they force you to think out of the box and leave those perceptions that you had before. But that is not always the case. So sometimes we just can't wait for shocks to happen to change. We need to have a policy that enables this change, or we need, as an industry, to foster this change. So I would like to ask you, Bernard, and then you, Herman, how do you think that policy can help this change, and how can we as an industry help this change in the transition?
The policy possibilities are, we have three different types of policy. The first one is the weakest one, that is recommendations. Recommendations, but in a long run, recommendations converted in programs, in curricula of education and vocational education are very strong, because it is an appropriation of the new knowledge and afterwards an implementation on the farm, for example. But the frame conditions, they have also to help this step of the farmer, because if the frame conditions are still like in the past, negative consequences are not taken in account and positive amenities are not taken in account, these don't help the farmer to make this step. And this means that the second type of measure is necessary. I mentioned it in the presentation: incentives for the good, positive things, and also taxes and disincentives for the where negative externality are appearing, like we have in the past. These taxes are not accepted by the farmers and also by the delivering industry. This is normal. The market will decrease. This is a normal approach, but we have to bring in front the advantages of this. And also what I mentioned, that the losers should have a perspective to gain again. in the new business, and this is not made enough visible. And the third possibility, there are regulations in pesticides. We have enough regulations, but these regulations are more and more drastic, so that the way out should also be a solution. What I would say, also based on my experience in my previous life in Bern, in the Swiss Federal Office of Agriculture, is we should introduce a system of navigation and also monitoring of all the effects, each at the farm level, that the farming family, the farmer's family can see what is my contribution for the society, for the planet, if I made the change from the classical methods to the new methods. We are individuals and we all need a reward when we make a step out of our comfort zone. And this reward is not enough visible for the moment.
Thank you, Bernard. Herman, what do you think we can do as an industry to support this change? Because I don't know how much we can influence that policy, and we are keeping on trying it, but maybe there is something more tangible that we can start doing now.
Well, I think there is still, as an industry, acting on policy and advocating the cause of biocontrol, which I'm convinced can contribute. It is not the only answer to the planetary boundaries that we're running into, like climate change, biodiversity loss, degradation of soils. I mean, I wouldn't say biocontrol solves it all, but biocontrol can make a big contribution, I think, in each of those areas to help us, let's say, navigate that we don't or that we work within planetary boundaries. I think Bernard's talk indicates a couple of areas where things need to change. One is basically internalize externalities, and every policy that, let's say, helps to reward farmers for creating positive externalities, storing more CO2 and so on is useful, and that sort of puts in the economic considerations the cost of negative externalities. Same thing is good. I think the limit of those types of policies is excessive bureaucracy. It's difficult to manage that without creating excessive bureaucracy. But I think Saulo's example of considering the CO2 intensity of your fuels, it's an example where it works and enhances moving in the right direction. But yet I think that the biggest thing that we as an industry need to push for is what Bernard described as the balance between loss of problem-solving capacity and gain of problem-solving ability. I think the loss of problem-solving capacity in the old way with synthetic pesticides will continue, if only for resistance development and continued environmental impact. It can be slowed down, but not stopped. I think where we need to act is the gain of problem-solving ability. Biocontrol has a lot of solutions in store, and in Europe, also in the US, we see they don't make it to the market quickly enough, and I think that has to do with the fact that it's insufficiently being recognized that biocontrol solutions are inherently different from the synthetic pesticide approach. I mean, they're not risk-free, but they have a different risk profile, and I think that should lead to still an evaluation, a sound evaluation of risks, but a faster system, recognizing also that biocontrol, in contrast to many synthetic pesticides, is not hitting many targets in many crops with one product, but using sort of diversified approaches. Each problem has a solution, and you need a broad portfolio to be able to manage the crop. And so if we make the hurdle so high, equally high, which in Europe we've done. We've adopted the same system for biocontrol and for synthetic pesticides with the same regulation, and we see that makes it, let's say, very difficult to harness the full innovative potential of this industry and make it available to farmers. And on the other hand, we see what happens when you do the contrary. When, like in Brazil, you recognize that difference and you create a fast track and you provide access to multiple products in an effective way. One, you're not missing out on any major risks that go unnoticed. It's possible to evaluate those products for safety. And second, you provide the potential for farmers, for industry, when a shock happens. I mean, you could respond because you had access to the toolbox. So I think as an industry, we should continue to work on that. And then I think we should focus as an industry also on transfer of knowledge, training farmers. I think a good example, company I work for, BioFirst, other companies in horticulture in Europe, I think we've built a tradition of standing by the farmer, advising the farmer, not only for our solutions, but looking at a comprehensive way of, looking at their crop as an ecosystem in which biological tools can be combined and utilized. And I think our industry, when the tools are available, I think stands prepared and will be able to play a key role in training and advising farmers and helping them develop programs. So I'm very optimistic about the capacity of our industry to act on that challenge. But let's for sure make a big difference first in filling the farmer's toolbox with more opportunities to solve the problems, and I think that will be an important starting point.
Thank you, Herman. So the message, and I stand up for this because it's quite important, the message for all of us is that we need to continue, all of us that are not the almost endangered farmer species, but the industry, all of us keep on educating, keep on advocating for biocontrol. And one of the problems you have mentioned, Herman, is that we have the struggle of fitting in the same system in Europe, at least, as a conventional, because maybe there was a perception problem or at the beginning that biocontrol is as the same as conventional. So in the legislator's mind, this perception led them to regulate them in the same way. But then when it comes to biocontrol, legislators are not the only ones who have perceptions about biocontrol, how it works, how it's used. And Pierre, you have been involved with the farmers community, you have been involved with the change in sustainable agriculture, and also recently you have been with us on a field trip in Belgium and the Netherlands. And by the way, there is a clip that is available on the IBMA LinkedIn, and I recommend you to have a look. And during this trip, we could talk with different stakeholders about their perceptions of biocontrol. What do you think is overall, in your experience, the perception, and how is it different between farming communities, consumers, and the us, let's say?
Yeah, thank you, Alessandra. Yeah, I'm indeed the external observer here. I'm a science journalist, so I started reporting about science, and step by step I specialized on agroecological solutions. And I took part to the IBMA field trips, but I also all the time traveling from farm to farm and from lab to lab to see the solutions, the innovations on the field. And yeah, the perception, I think the first perception which is interesting to me is the one of my audience, the consumers, so to say. And they have like it's a paradox, like you have high expectation, of course, in the consumers when it comes to climate and environment. And you also have a very low understanding of the challenges that farmers and farming in general are facing. So my job is to close this gap between expectation and knowledge. So I'm trying to, I'm convinced that the key to close this gap is really to go to farms and to show your reality. Max, you were seeing for farmers, seeing is believing. I think for consumers, understanding is really believing, and it's really the key. So I'm going to a wide diversity of European farms in my work, from very small permaculture farms, 1 hectare, to very big 500 hectares cereal farms, and I'm trying to understand how they are facing similar challenges and how they choose the innovation. And I think when it comes to agroecological and biocontrol solutions, it's important to explain not only how they're using these new solutions, but also why they're doing it, and to explain the diversity of philosophies and ways to do it. So I'm going to do it with the IBM field trips that I did, and I'm doing it all the time on Arte and on my YouTube channel. I think one of the key points, also listening to you in this panel discussion and all the day yesterday and today, would be to go away also from the conventional, to really explain to the consumers why farmers need biocontrol solution, to really go away from the conventional storytelling and explain the complexity of farming, because they really need to understand why farmers are choosing this or this solution. So they need to understand that it's not one problem, one solution. When you go away from conventional storytelling, you need to really explain, okay, it's a whole bunch of solutions, it's a whole toolbox you're talking about, and this is the big challenge for me as a journalist to explain to the wider audience.
Thank you, Pierre, and please, please, please keep doing so, because we need more voices like yours, and I see you nodding also, Max, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just to bring in, I think it was very well put in place, how the consumer and also the farmer. And I think one thing that as a farmer, I'm looking at it from the farmer's perspective. I'm also quite active in the Brussels bubble. I'm working for Copa Cogeca under there for the phytosanitary working group. I'm chairing it, but I'm also looking at the full food chain. So I'm chairing the agri-food chain roundtable on plant protection. So I have actually also the possibility to look it from the whole chain's perspective. And here I think just one observation that I think it's important for you in the audience. A lot of people still see these two camps. One, chemical plant protection, and the other camp is the biocontrol. They are never matched, at least easily, in the discussion or in the communication. That's one thing that should be done, and I think that would help quite a bit also the consumers to understand that you actually need a comprehensive toolbox that will actually be working on both of these. Now there are two different camps, one advocating for this, another one for that, and that is not so easy for farmers or consumers or the food chain as a whole to really understand where are we supposed to stand, what are we supposed to want. And I think that's very important to be able to bring into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. And since we are so lucky today to have this panel here with us, I think it's time to open the floor to questions from the audience. After all you have heard, are there any questions you want to ask? So please, go ahead.
So I have a question to Max, actually. Max, imagine we have magic happening, and all of a sudden you have access to very good products at the right cost and the right performance available in other countries. So let's say the magic happens. Next week you have access to those amazing products that already exist. What would be the challenges for European farmers, like for the industry to get to European farmers with those technologies?
No, thank you. That's a very, very good question. And I think that if we would have them freely available, they would have gone through the very complex regulation system, and we would actually have them on the market. Then I would focus mainly at how they are put into the hands of the farmers. How is the next step of the chain? The cooperatives that might be the source of the input sales to the farmers, also the agronomists, how they have been trained, but also how they can explain how this fits in to your operation today, all of these. They need to be involved even more today than what they are. At least I'm using as much as possible when I get my hands on some products, biocontrol, etc. But there is still not enough know-how and knowledge by the people that are actually representing them or selling them. So I think that would be the first thing to really work very well and very hard on, to make sure that they can give advice also on how they are being applied and used and all these. And just a very small thing, it's easier for them to pick something that was there already yesterday and sell it, because usually that has already, they have the knowledge and know-how, and most probably also might give them a little bit more behind or under the line at that stage. We need to get them engaged also to take the step out and start to talk about more complex way of doing plant protection. And I think that's one of the things that really has to be done in Europe more or less yesterday, to be able to get out. Not only focus here on one sector or segment, no, you have to go in and for all of them, the conventional, the organics, all the different sectorials and all these, start to work. For sure, that puts a lot of strain into you as companies as well, because you have to then make sure that you have the information there. You have to be able to answer some quite difficult questions, most probably. But I mean, we as farmers, we have to answer these difficult questions every day when it comes, either if it is market, legislation or whatever, and we are up to it. So why not you?
Max, if I can add something to this question, Jonas, I think it's what's going on in Brazil. We have good products at the correct price. We have availability, and still companies like yours that are bio inputs producers, you have to have a huge workforce on the field doing the education to the agronomists and the farmers. So they need to be educated. They need to see that works through seeing results of trials, through going in a neighbor field, neighbor farm, so they can see it's really working. Because they, like Max said, the product they used yesterday, they know it works. They have used it for years, for decades sometimes. And now it's a whole new set of products, so they need to believe on this. So I think that's perfectly the situation we have in Brazil. That's the challenge.
We move on to more questions. Please, before you start, if you can introduce yourself by your name and affiliation, and we go with Kit and then Laislot.
Hi, my name is Ketan Mehta. I'm from India with a company called EcoSense Labs. So very unique situations in Asia and Africa, very small land holdings. Farmers are not having that much money to spend. Every time they go out on the field, it costs money to go out on the field and come back. So we have to try and give as much as biological solutions at one situation of introduction. And the best and most cost-effective and cost-efficient is seed treatment. And I'm proud to say this year we have, for rice, we have been able to treat 3 million kilograms of rice with the biological products for sowing in parts, about 7 or 8 states of rice growing in India. And that is where that small impact goes a long way, because it's available in the soil from sowing till harvest. And this is what is needed for smallholder farmers. They do not have the money because most of it is either farm-saved seed, or if it's a hybrid, then it's... And this is something which is not there in any other continents, Africa and Asia, and it will not change for a long time. So we have to think differently for these two continents. This is where I think, going with what you are saying, is that they don't have access. But this is the only way, sir, it can change.
I think you've summarized it nicely. We are unlike many parts of the world. We are in Africa and maybe perhaps in India, where we have an agricultural sector that is still, improving, but is still not able to to contribute significantly to the GDP. We export very little, and whatever we export should comply with a certain number of, measures, phytosanitary measures, of which maybe one of the solutions is biological control, because then, we don't deal with maximum residue limits and all that. However, like what is true for Europe, biological control solutions, seeing is believing for many farmers. You have to convince them that these solutions are effective the same way as, the conventional solutions, even though, there's also issues of resistance and other, environmental effects that are actually, seen with those solutions. But the knockdown effect for African farmers, if the pests are chewing their crops, they don't want to hear a solution telling them that it takes 72 hours, to work. For them, they have to deal with it, like desert locust. Let's say it comes and it's chewing your entire crop. Something must be done immediately. But there must be more awareness creation, that I agree. We also need to, like he mentioned, to take strong policies, not just recommendations, but take actions such as, I'm not saying banning, but create incentive, like, subsidizing wherever it's possible. Make sure that those solutions are available at a cheaper price. Some companies I know in Africa have sort of like cracked it all by trying to come up with a marketing mix strategy. They know that, for instance, 1 liter of biopesticide could cost approximately, let's say, $30 to $50. But they create a way to give small quantities that are enough, because you said the land is very small and most of the agriculture is subsistential. So they use maybe, 100 milligrams or 500 milligrams at a cheaper price. And by so doing, they are able to allow more farmers to afford these products. Same for attractants like the fruit fly attractants, They have a way actually to use marketing mix, playing with the price, playing with the promotion, playing with the place, and making sure that maximum farmers can access to those technology. I do agree that that part of the world, the thinking should be different, compared to Europe. That I do agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Keter. Thank you, Saliu. And we have one more question, and then another.
Max, for the farmers. I'm Lieslot van der Veke, ProTerra Agro. For years, I've now been bridging biocontrol to South America. So that means tropicalizing biocontrol, just in short. What we see in South America, huge things are happening in biocontrol. It's really very hopeful. Also, on a larger scale, the planetary boundaries we're talking about. Can I please state that biocontrol has a huge role to play here in counteracting and remediating soils, counteracting planetary boundaries, and that we are all well aware of it? I wanted to ask Max, don't you think we should be already educating our farmers so that by the time the solution really arrives to the market, the farmers are well educated? I think examples are there from Brazil. In the tropical climates where climate change, heavy weather events, all those extreme events are much more pronounced and for many years going on, we now see that farmers really want to do something about it. They actually ask for biological solutions because they know when they get their soil right again. If we just talk organic matter, 1% of organic matter rise means 160 liters of water that is retained extra. We all here in the room have solutions that can really help rebuilding those soils, rebuilding those agro-ecosystems so that they're climate resistant. What would be your suggestion, Max, for farmers? How would you like to see those schools? Would it be farmer field schools with fields in different eco-regions where we just build packages around crops, or how would you like to see it so that farmers, that it's easy digestible, that they can see how these things work? I don't think we have to wait for regulation to change and then start educating farmers. No, we should be starting already to educate those farmers. if we want, because it's not the holy grail getting regulation right. Then the educational part starts. That's what I've seen from Latin America. And you see, once they get educated, the farmers, it's really empowering those farmers and making them understand these natural solutions are their allies. Working with nature does result in a higher margin, does result in a better livelihood, and all of that, making them see that. How would you like to see those schools? How can we organize ourselves already so that it can be a grassroots movement? If I was talking with the people of Brazil, it's the farmers asking for the biological solutions. The farmer group is a powerful political group. It's what brings the food on the table. So then politicians will have to change again. Let's say, how do we do that to tackle this from two sides, bottom up and then the legislation? Thank you.
Thank you for a very good question. And I was just going to say the education is there already. It's ongoing. The problem is that there has been a lot of farmers, they have looked at this, they would like to be able to use it, they have been building up their systems and all of this, and they're still waiting to get the products. And that has become for them a little bit like an anticlimax. Wait a second, but I would like to be able to get my hands on these. I would like to be able to use them, at least now when we talk about growing under the big roof. Glass houses is a bit different. There we see that there is a lot of things going on already. But when it comes into the big crops, they're still waiting in many regions and many countries. And for the crops, I mean, there are just not the products on the market. They have not gone through the legislational process to be put on the market. So farmers have started to be tired of waiting. That's one thing. Second thing is, I agree 100%, we also have to face and really look into how it is being taught when you are talking about agricultural schools, talking about universities, etc. You said that, Saul, you had 4 hours of biocontrol in your time. I had 0 hours when I was studying, quite a few years before. So the thing is, we have to also bring it in to the agricultural schools, lower education, but also up to the higher education as well, to be able to spread it out from there. And yes, we have to put more effort in it because we are the ones that actually are using it, and we should actually be asking, as we have been. The problem is also that we had quite a controversial discussion during the last 5-year period when it comes to our sustainable use regulation package. And it became fairly heated, and there became a little bit of a difficult situation for the farmers also to follow how to do, where to be, and what to do. So I think we took half a step back and say, let's wait and see what's going to be coming towards us the next time. But yes, if we would have more knowledge, more know-how, and the products at the same time, that we would be able to use really seeing is believing techniques. That's why we would need demo farms. You asked for that. You also need to have demo farms per region or per member states so that you would be able to really see how it works in your climate. And this is for sure an effort that is quite big. Don't know exactly how to start to build up this, but maybe the industry by themselves. For instance, what we did already earlier on, as mentioned, visit some farmers in Holland and Belgium to see and to discuss with them, to talk also in between the stakeholders when you were moving from one farm to another. I think that also is education to everybody involved. We need to do that as well. So it's not only to educate the farmers, but it's also to educate the rest around it. But yes, absolutely, we need it. And all the good examples that you can bring in from Brazil, from elsewhere, please let us know. We are very much willing to look into it and see if it can be, like people say nowadays, it's not to borrow, it's copy-paste. Everybody understands that.
Thank you. I suggest on the knowledge centers, it's not rocket science. Take your sustainability leaders within the farmers' aggregation and maybe build upon that. They are very willing to do so, but incentivize them to do, because right now they are overloaded to educate their peers.
Thank you. We take one. Sorry, Herman. You can answer very quickly.
Just something I would like to add to this farmer education. Of course, the farmers have to be educated on the big picture and the big trends, but I think as an industry, what we could provide to help that process, In vegetable crops, for example, we are sufficiently advanced to each company can talk about a package and a program. I think in field crops, we're still there with piecemeal solutions. I think what could help that education process also after discussion with Max is as an industry, if we bring together the elements of solution that we already have, even it's not complete, let's bring that together, let's offer that material to farmers and let's go in interaction with farmers to start building on where we are today so that we get the process going to fill things with content.
Thank you,
And
Erwin.
bring more farmers into this room. That would help already.
We have one last question from the audience. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Miriam Olortegui from Certis Biologicals. First, I want to shortly remark to the audience what the representatives of Copa Cochiga said. Farmers are business people. So let's remove that romantic image from our heads and let's think about it as entrepreneurs. Second, I want to say we've heard a couple of times at least in this session, I need to see that the product works. We need a mind shift on what is actually crop protection. So we expect to apply something and that next day everything, all the pests or diseases are dead. That's not how it works. We need really to have a good understanding of the crop physiology, pest physiology, etc. So let's start mind shifting what we learned about pesticides in the past. That's not the case anymore.
Thank you.
I think now you come into the real broad meaning of IPM that we have now in the place. And I think this is a thing that has been done and it's going to be done even more effectively in the future. And here you come in then with precision farming, you come in with the possibility of early warning systems, you come in with a very good tool for the farmers, the apps that you will have in your phone that will be able to give information in and all this. So we have to change the whole way how we are working on the integrated pest management as a whole. And that's ongoing already today. But for sure, that also needs investments, not only in software and apps that are usually fairly cheap, and they work extremely well. You also need to connect some of this to the hardware. And unfortunately, the hardware, that's an investment, even quite a big investment. And that's why the uptake is slower, but it's on its way. But for that to be able to have a very well and effectively working IPM, you need a big portfolio. You cannot only do IPM with one substance. You need to have a comprehensive, broad portfolio in your hand consisting of biocontrols. You need to have your seed treatment there as well. That is a very important part of IPM as well, even if some people have a doubt about it, and I would say it's one of the most effective part of it. We need there just to have an early warning system to tell when the risk is high, then you treat the seeds that year. And then you need also your chemical ones. You need all of these and you need a broad base. Then you will get the IPM really to work.
Thank you. And we are tight on time, but if you have any other questions, all our speakers will be here today, so you can try and find them in the 2 floors of the exhibitions area, also in the poster session. And before we leave, I would like to ask you one last question. If you have to choose one action that can help promote and advance biocontrol use and in general IPM adoption, what will be the action that you will take? Maybe starting from Bernard?
I'm fully going in your sense, but I wrote it yesterday. I would really emphasize the vocational education, to invest in this vocational education, to give it more space to the biocontrol methods, show the limit of the use of the classical pesticides, show the possibilities, and also help for this transition on the ground, but also transition in the head. And the second is the extension services, to have a plan for a transition concept at farm level, maybe at farm level, from the classical to environmental friendly methods, also pilot farms. On one word, this should be an investment in the future, education and extension. And it could be financed by public and private. It could be a private-public partnership to involve all the industry helping going in this sense with all the limitations they have still, with the products missing, but the public could express the need of the society and the need of the whole society for a better agriculture within the planetary boundaries. And let me just close with one question, but questions are good for the end because the thinking is continuing. Why do we not have a label identifying the use of biocontrol? Organic, from the feeble hair, I know that, organic has a label and a strict label, and this gives the possibility for the consumer to help to support this kind of production. Why is this not an issue in that I was waiting the whole hour now for the discussion. It never appears. That's my question for the closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard.
For me, if there is anything that we must focus on is capacity building. It's going to be capacity building, but inside you have to hear formal capacity building, like development of curriculums, a whole curriculum on this, but informal capacity building in a field of dissemination, technology transfer, lobbying, advocacy, communication, all right? Just so that we create awareness. So because I believe that this particular capacity building that I am having inside under so many other components is the one that will change the mind and create the demand. And then if it creates the demand, then it will influence policy. Policy cannot happen before there is demand. There must be demand. Then policymakers can respond to that. For me, that will be the thing. I represent 55 member states in Africa, and I think that will be what I will focus on, training people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say very simply communication. Communication inside the chain, that everybody understands and knows what we are talking about when it comes down to plant protection as a whole. I think that's very important. Everything from the beginning all the way to the consumer and everything in between there. Good communication. And one question, just very fast to answer to the question, why maybe not a label when you look at it? Will it always be so that you only, as a farmer, use only biocontrol? How would you define who can use the label or not? Biocontrol is a package of a lot of things there, but IPM, as on top of that, also includes then the chemical ones. Would it be maybe more and better to think about some kind of an, how would I say, IPM or something like this label instead of just going one way? This is also just a big question, not an answer.
Okay, so Alessandra, since your question just allows us to one action, I would say the efficient regulatory framework would be great. That will make sure that we have the product available with the right quality, the right cost. That will make it happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, following what you said before about farmers being entrepreneurs, I think to help them using more biocontrol solutions, I think you need to secure them because they are entrepreneurs. They need to sell their products. And maybe to take one action to support them in this way. I mean, you were talking about labels, both of you. There is one label, so to say, it's not a label, which is called Planet Score, developed in France. And I think this would be one good solution because it's not biocontrol, but it would rate A for biocontrol solutions most of the time. So maybe that's something you could support as an industry as well.
Yeah, I come back to, let's say, bring more products to market. Regulatory is key, but if that's, let's say, too far, I think then step number one is for all the regulatory authorities to bring the right expertise on board. They get more biocontrol applications to evaluate than classical chemical ones, and yet the composition of their teams is flawed towards old expertise and not the new expertise. And maybe say as an industry, hey, regulatory authorities bring these people on board, and we as an industry, we're happy to pay for the evaluation of our files when it's done effectively with the right knowledge and with the right speed.
Thank you, Herman. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your suggestions. And it looks like there are two areas we need to work on. One is communication, education, and maintaining the channel open. And the second one is regulatory framework and how to have more tools. And I think actually if you are interested in hearing more about this or even commenting about this afternoon there is actually a session where Salio will be present, and it will be accompanied by colleagues from the European Commission, the EPA, the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, and Australia PBMA. So it will be a good forum to actually tackle some of the challenges we have seen here today. So now I'll let you go and enjoy your lunch, and a big, big thank you to the panelists here today.